let's jump into our first game that we're going to break down today. Noon on Saturday, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Damn, that was pretty good, actually.
That was good. Thank you, Gus.
Geez, that sounded just like him. I don't know where I don't know where that just came from. They visit the Michigan Wolverines. The Michigan Wolverines are a 3.5-point favorite. This line opened up higher than that at about 5, I think is what it was. So if you got in on that, there was obviously a considerable amount of money that came in on that line towards Ohio State. And it actually, from what I understand, had gotten down closer to 3, and then some money came in for Michigan and moved it back up to 3.5. So we're back and forth as a betting society, right? We're the money is pretty even here, and I think we're going to settle right around 3. So let's go through some of the numbers. Shall we? We shall. Michigan this year is obviously undefeated, and everybody knows how good this defense is. And I'm going to go ahead and read some of these defensive stats because I think that is absolutely the highlight of this team. Yards per game given up 216. That's second in the FBS. That's amazing. That is very, very good. Rushing yards per game allowed 90. That's 9th. Okay. Spoiler alert, nothing defensively is outside of the top 10 for this team. I mean, nothing is outside of the top 10. They're first in passing yards allowed per game at 126. And points per game allowed, average of 9 points per game allowed. Incredible. A single digit. A single digit there. JJ McCarthy has had a decent year, but something that we've talked about here recently as we kind of transition into this offense. I mean, as I said, there's not a ton to break down this defense. I mean, seriously, other than last week, Maryland kind of throwing the ball around on them, there hadn't been much of that. There hadn't been much of that, and they gave up like no rushing yards last week. So I'm not so sure that wasn't just part of the plan. We'll just dare them to throw the ball. But going into the offense, J.J. McCarthy's 2,335 yards so far this year. The last 3 weeks, he has not thrown a touchdown, though. And, if you combine his yardage over the last couple of weeks, I think he's thrown like 200 yards, not per game, total. So whenever we broke down the Michigan and Maryland game that happened this past week, Michigan won that game 31-24 if you missed it. One possession ball game, and it was as close as it looked. I mean, it really was. And J.J. McCarthy looked really bad, threw a really bad interception. And this is just really, really bad timing because Michigan fans were just telling us that they don't have to throw the ball. They didn't have to throw the ball against Penn State. But I'm telling you right now, in that game that they played last week, they would have preferred to been able to throw the ball.
Yeah.
Okay. He was 12 of 23 for 141 yards and a pick. No touchdowns. So, I mean, that's obviously not very good, and it's not going to get it done coming up this week, I don't think either. So let's kind of look through Michigan's schedule for just a minute. Listen to these opponents, Mason. And I know you already know, but as in Mason, I'm speaking to you, the crowd, through Mason. They've played East Carolina. They won 30-3. UNLV 35-7. Bowling Green 31-6. Rutgers 31-7. Nebraska 45-7. Minnesota 52-10. Indiana 52-7. Michigan State 49-0. Purdue 41-13. Penn State 24-15, and then Maryland 31-24. I mean, just listen to the front part of that. I mean, East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green, Rutgers, Nebraska, Minnesota, Indiana, Michigan State, Purdue. That is horrible.
Yeah.
That is one of the worst schedules that I've ever seen for a CFP contender up to that point of the season. Then they played Penn State, and you got to give them their props. They did what they needed to do against Penn State. With that being said, no style points involved. I mean, it was like they were bringing in defensive tackles to play offensive line, bringing in extra offensive linemen, and they just crammed it down their throat. It was ugly, but they won. And at this point in the season, all Michigan needs to do is win, right? Um, you want to kind of break down the Michigan side of this, Mason, and tell me what your thoughts are on this, and then let's kind of go into Ohio State and we'll give our game predictions. How about that? That sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good. I want to start with their schedule. Kind of start where you left off there. For as much flack as Michigan's been given for their schedule, and it is bad. You just went through it. There's no hiding it. I'm not here to tell you that it's actually better than you think, but I don't think that Ohio State's is really that much better, right? You add the Notre Dame game.
Yeah.
That's certainly better than anybody else they have the Penn State the same game in Penn State, but and then Notre Dame is better than any other team on Michigan's schedule. But outside of that, they look the same, right? And I don't think that Notre Dame is a game that exactly wows me, anymore. At the time, it was a big game, but Notre Dame's pretty average, top 25, yeah, okay. But they don't wow me like I thought that they would. So I think it's important to note that as well. These two teams have really had similar schedules, and I don't think that it gets talked about enough from the Ohio State perspective. For Michigan, we've come to expect them to have a great defense for the past few seasons now. And while they, haven't played anybody, they do pass the eye test defensively. Now, I could give you all sorts of stats, and those stats might suggest that Michigan has an edge in this game, but I don't think any of the stats from the previous games will give us a real idea of what will happen in this game. The Wolverines were challenged on the road last week against Maryland and were forced to pass the ball, unlike what we saw the previous week against Penn State, who struggled to get anything going offensively to really threaten Michigan, and forcing them to pass. What happened when Michigan was tested enough to warrant actually passing the ball more than 8 times was McCarthy, as you mentioned, had his worst game of the season, going 12 for 23, 141 yards and an interception, no touchdowns. Michigan in this game, Michigan's not going to be able to rely on Blake Corum to run the ball 38 times. He had 28 carries last game. He scored 2 touchdowns, right? That's not going to happen against Ohio State. Ohio State is not last year's Ohio State. They have a much better defense. They're going to force Michigan to throw the ball in this game, and McCarthy absolutely has to play better this week. This is a much improved Ohio State defense, and in order for Michigan to have a chance to win, we've got to see better play from McCarthy in this game, and he might have to do that without his best receiver in Roman Wilson. His status is still questionable this weekend. He left last week, and he's listed as questionable. So we'll see. He's at least not 100%. I think we can pretty confidently say. But if to me, for Michigan to win this game, McCarthy's got to protect the football, right? First of all, and I think if he throws for at least 200 yards, I think that Michigan wins this game. And I do think that it's that simple. But
Yeah.
that's what I got for Michigan, at least.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. Part of what I'm getting at when I read that schedule, out of those teams, I really can't even pick out which one is the best passing offense that they've seen. And not to mention the passing offense that Michigan sees every day in practice is their own. We haven't seen them up against, and look, you said, just like you said it, the schedule is very similar. Notre Dame is kind of the odd team out. I believe Wisconsin is the odd team out as well. Neither one of those can throw the football,
Right.
So you could say the same for Ohio State, but Ohio State has something that Michigan doesn't have, and that's Maserati Marv, right?
Yeah.
1,093 yards on the year, and honestly, kind of a quiet 1,093 yards, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a 1,000-yard receiver, is every team doesn't have a 1,000-yard receiver, y'all. So that's more rare than what you think. Honestly, even in today's college football, those are those are well sought after players, and for Ohio State to have that on their side, I think is a very big deal in this game. Let's jump into Ohio State and let's look at the numbers here. Um, let's start off defensively because we talked about Michigan and how stout they were defensively. Ohio State, these numbers don't look as good, but man, they're very, very good. Very, very comparable. Yards per game, 240 per game. That's third in the country. Rushing yards allowed per game, 108. That's top 25. That's 21st. Passing yards per game allowed 131. That's second. And points per game, 9.3. That's second in FBS, right behind Michigan there. Excuse me. So Michigan got the number one scoring defense in the country. Ohio State, number two. Offensively, 419.4 yards per game is actually 37th best, man. Some of these numbers actually kind of surprised me. The passing yards per game, 273.8. That's top 25
Mm-hmm.
for Ohio State. Okay. Points per game, 33.6. That's top 25. So I feel like on the Michigan side, you've got a better defense. Obviously, I think is the numbers are comparable, but clearly Michigan has the edge defensively. But defense don't play defense. Defense plays offense, and I think that this Ohio State team is the best passing team that Michigan's seen all year, and this is the best offense that Michigan's seen all year. And I think Ohio State is a little bit more battle tested. Um, I'm probably gonna be riding with the Ohio State Buckeyes to cover that spread. Look, y'all, the winner of this game, I think, is a coin flip. This game hasn't come down to like a field goal the last few years or anything. I think it will this time. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's coming down to like a field goal. I think that number is right on. I think I would lean with Ohio State and the points there to cover, but I don't know that I can pick them to win it, but I guess I might as well. I'm gonna go ahead and jump out there. I'm gonna pick Ohio State to win this game. I
Yeah.
think I think they got the difference maker that's necessary, and I think this run game has been rejuvenated a bit. I feel like Henderson is kind of catching a groove a little bit right now. He had a nice week last week. Um, Egbuka had a nice little week last week. But we got some threats on this offense that maybe are about to emerge here at the end and give Ohio State some momentum going into the Big Ten championship game and the playoff. Give me Ohio State.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. So I gave you, my perspective on how Michigan can get it done this weekend. Let me give you my idea of how Ohio State gets it done. So I think it's pretty simple, right? I mentioned that McCarthy is kind of the catalyst in this game for Michigan. He's also the catalyst in this game for Ohio State, but for a different reason. Because I think that defense has got to prevent McCarthy from having a great game. Get pressure on him, create those off balance throws, and really the one time that the Michigan offensive line, which is really good, but the one time they were really tested against Penn State, they gave up 7 tackles for a loss, including 1 sack. And that was in a game where their quarterback McCarthy just threw the ball 8 times, and
Barely
they
threw it.
still had 7 tackles for a loss. Right? He's not holding on to the football. That's running the football. So they were getting in the backfield. I would say that Penn State has a better pass rush than Ohio State, but they're not that far apart. But so for this 2-time Joe Moore Award offensive line, for as good as they have been, when they were tested against a similar defensive line, they did not perform well. So if Ohio State's D can perform at that same level, I think that will set up the offense well for success. And at that point, Kyle McCord just needs to deliver. So as much as I don't like to say this game's going to rely on the quarterback, which quarterback plays the best, right? I do think that there's a strong case to be made in this game that the first quarterback to get to 200 yards probably wins this game, right? I think that more than any other game that I've broken down this year, that seems to be the case. And like you mentioned, Mark, McCord has the weapons, right?
Mhm.
He's got this wide receiver unit, which is quite possibly the best overall unit in college football. You know, he certainly has arguably the best overall player in college football and Marvin Harrison. But, you know, you couple that with Egbuka, who has been injured for a lot of the season, and he's
Mhm.
now this will be his fourth game back from injury. He's gotten better and better. Had I think 5 catches last week, so maybe we're seeing him at his healthiest that he's been all season. So if they can get those two guys going, I think that you know Ohio State's going to be able to win this game. I think it's going to be a little bit. I think that this will be a one-score game, but my prediction is that Ohio State gets their revenge this week, wins a close game, but I think they win at 24-17. It'll be low scoring. I like the under in this game. Two really good defenses, probably two top 5 defenses when the season's said and done. So I like the under play most, but I also think that Ohio State on the money line has good value, and of
Mhm.
course I'm picking them to cover.
Yeah, and we'll be doing our betting show on Friday, so anybody watching this if you're into that type of thing, tune in Friday for our best bets on our Between the Lines
Thursday
segment.
night. Thursday night.
Thursday, excuse me, Freudian slip, we used to do it on Friday. But I agree. I think that the difference in this game is gonna be Ohio State testing those outside corners for Michigan. We saw Maryland have some success with that last week. They were able to launch some balls. They threw for about 300 yards, and I think Kyle McCord, while I don't think he can throw for 300 on this squad, I think he can. I think he can hit that 200-yard mark. I really do. So, man, this is a big game, dude. This is they call it the game, and this year they should call it the big game because it's the biggest game of the year, and cannot wait to see it. That one comes on at noon on Saturday.